On the morning of his wedding, billionaire CEO Maxwell Reed had everything, until a tragic accident put him in a coma. When he wakes, he realizes the woman who saved him isn't his fiancée, but a kind-hearted hospital cleaner. Will he fight? For his company and his heart. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun shined through the large windows of Maxwell Reed's penthouse apartment. At 45, Maxwell had everything a man could want. He was CEO of Reed Technologies, one of the biggest software companies on the East Coast, lived in a luxury building overlooking Central Park, and was engaged to Victoria Winters, a former model-turned-lifestyle influencer. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, his wedding day. Maxwell adjusted his black bow tie as he looked in the mirror. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his custom-made tuxedo fit him like a glove. But something didn't feel right. There was a nagging feeling in his gut that he couldn't shake. "You look like $1 million," said his best friend and business partner Thomas Wilson, walking into the room with 2 glasses of whiskey. Pre-wedding jitters? Maxwell took the glass and downed it in one gulp. "Something like that." "Cold feet?" Thomas asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's not too late to back out, you know." "Don't be ridiculous," Maxwell replied, though the thought had crossed his mind more than once over the past few weeks. Victoria had been acting strange since he proposed, more concerned with the wedding photos for her social media than their actual relationship. "Well, the guests are arriving. Victoria's already texting me asking where you are. You better get going." Maxwell nodded. "I need some air first. Tell her I'll be there in 20 minutes. Max, the ceremony starts in 30. I just need to clear my head. I'll take the Porsche and be at the venue before you know it." Thomas looked concerned, but knew better than to argue. "Just don't leave me to explain to your future wife why you're late to your own wedding." Maxwell grabbed his car keys and headed to the garage. The sleek black Porsche was his pride and joy, a car he bought after closing his first major business deal. As he settled into the driver's seat, he felt his phone vibrate. Victoria again. He ignored it and pulled out onto the street. The road to the wedding venue took him along the Hudson River. Maxwell rolled down the windows, letting the cool spring air wash over him. He needed to think. Was he making a mistake? Did Victoria truly love him, or was she just in love with his money and status? Lost in thought, he didn't notice the delivery truck swerving into his lane until it was too late. Maxwell jerked the wheel to avoid a collision, but the Porsche spun out of control. Everything happened in slow motion. The screeching of tires, the crash barrier approaching, the sensation of flying. Then darkness. Jenny Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway of New York Metropolitan Hospital. At 32, she was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Her nurse's aide position during the day paid the bills, and her evening cleaning job at the hospital helped save for Lily's college fund. "Did you hear about the big shot they brought in this morning?" asked Nancy, another cleaner, as they waited for the elevator. "No, who?" Jenny asked, tying her brown hair into a ponytail. "Some rich guy who crashed his fancy car. Supposed to be getting married today. The place has been swarming with reporters. The elevator doors opened, and they wheeled their carts inside. They've got him in the private wing on the 6th floor. His fiancée's been making a scene, demanding the best doctors. Like money can fix everything," Nancy continued. Jenny just nodded. The rich and their problems seemed a world away from her daily struggles of making rent and helping Lily with homework. When she reached the 6th floor, Jenny saw the commotion. Doctors rushed in and out of a room at the end of the hall. A beautiful, blonde woman in a designer dress was arguing loudly with a doctor, while photographers snapped pictures from a distance. "Ms. Winters, we're doing everything we can," the doctor was saying. "Mr. Reed is in critical condition. The next 48 hours will be crucial." "This is unacceptable. Do you know who he is?" "Who I am," the woman shouted. "I want the best neurologist in the country here by tonight." Jenny kept her head down and continued with her work, cleaning the empty rooms nearby. Hours later, when she was finishing her shift, she noticed the hallway was quiet. The crowd of people had dispersed, including the blonde woman. Curiosity got the better of her and she peeked into the room. The man lying in the bed was hooked up to various machines. His handsome face was bruised, and a bandage wrapped around his head. For someone who had caused such a commotion, he looked surprisingly vulnerable. Jenny stepped inside to empty the trash can. As she worked, she glanced at the chart at the foot of the bed. Maxwell Reed, 45, severe head trauma. "You picked quite a day to end up here, Mr. Reed," she said softly, not expecting a response. "I heard you were supposed to get married." The steady beeping of the heart monitor was her only answer. Jenny finished her task and turned to leave, but something made her stop. She looked back at the man in the bed. "My daughter always says that talking helps people heal, so if you can hear me, don't give up. There are people waiting for you to wake up." With that, she left the room and continued with her rounds, unaware that this encounter would be the first of many. The news of Maxwell Reed's accident spread like wildfire. The next day, the hospital lobby was filled with reporters and business associates trying to get information about his condition. Thomas Wilson pushed through the crowd, showing his ID to security to gain access to the private wing. When he reached Maxwell's room, he found Victoria sitting in a corner scrolling through her phone. "How is he?" Thomas asked. Victoria looked up, her eyes suspiciously dry for someone whose fiancé was in a coma. "The same. The doctors say he might not wake up for weeks, maybe months." She returned to her phone. "I've had to postpone the honeymoon. My followers are devastated. The wedding hashtag was trending." Thomas fought back a wave of disgust. Have his parents been notified? What parents? Max never talks about his family. Victoria stood up and smoothed her designer dress. "Listen, I have a meeting with my publicist about how to handle this situation. Can you stay with him? The nurses say someone should talk to him, might help him wake up or whatever." Before Thomas could respond, she was out the door, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering behind her. Thomas sat down beside his friend's bed. "Oh, Max, what a mess." A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. A woman in a cleaning uniform entered, looking surprised to see him. "Sorry, I can come back later," she said, turning to leave. "No, it's okay. Come in." Thomas stood up. "I'm Thomas Wilson, Maxwell's friend." "Jenny Martinez," she replied with a polite smile. "I'm just here to clean." Thomas nodded and watched as she efficiently went about her duties. Unlike Victoria, who treated the hospital staff like servants, Jenny had a quiet dignity about her. "Have you been taking care of this room since he arrived?" Thomas asked. "Yes," Jenny replied. "I work the evening shift." "Has his fiancée been here much?" Jenny hesitated. "I've seen her a few times, usually with photographers." Thomas wasn't surprised. "And has anyone else visited? Family members?" "Not that I've seen. Just business people in suits." Jenny finished emptying the trash. "It's sad, isn't it? All those people outside wanting something from him, but how many actually care about him as a person?" Her observation hit Thomas hard. It was true. Maxwell had surrounded himself with people who wanted his money, his connections, his power. But who was there for Maxwell the man? "I talk to him sometimes," Jenny admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "When I'm cleaning, they say coma patients can hear." Thomas smiled for the first time that day. "I think that's wonderful. I'm sure he appreciates it, wherever his mind is right now." After Jenny left, Thomas sat back down and took Maxwell's hand. "You've got good people looking out for you, Max, even if you don't know it yet." A week passed, and Maxwell's condition remained unchanged. The media lost interest in the story of the CEO in a coma, moving on to fresher scandals. Victoria's visits became less frequent, usually timed when a sympathetic article was due to be published. Meanwhile, at Reed Technologies, chaos was brewing. Without Maxwell at the helm, the company was vulnerable. Richard Hayes, the ambitious CFO, called an emergency board meeting. "Gentlemen, ladies," Richard addressed the board members, "while we all hope for Maxwell's recovery, we must face facts. The company needs leadership. Now I propose a temporary transfer of power." Thomas, as COO, spoke up. "Maxwell has a recovery plan in place. I have limited power of attorney for business affairs." Richard smiled coldly. "A limited power that doesn't cover major decisions. We're about to launch our new software platform. We need someone with full authority. And you're volunteering?" Thomas asked sarcastically. I'm the logical choice, Richard replied, and I have Victoria's support. This revelation stunned Thomas. Victoria has no say in company matters. As Maxwell's fiancée and future wife, she has his best interests at heart. She agrees that I should take temporary control. The board seemed swayed by this argument. Thomas realized he was losing ground. I need to consult with our legal team before any vote takes place. Of course, Richard said smoothly. We'll reconvene in 3 days. After the meeting, Thomas drove straight to the hospital. He needed to update Maxwell's medical directive, giving himself more authority before Richard and Victoria could seize control of everything. When he arrived, he found Jenny, reading a book aloud beside Maxwell's bed. She jumped up when she saw him. I'm sorry, I was on my break and thought he might like some company, she explained. Don't apologize, Thomas said. What are you reading to him? The Count of Monte Cristo. It's about a man who loses everything but finds his way back. She closed the book. I should get back to work. Jenny, wait, Thomas called after her. How often do you sit with him? Most evenings, no one else seems to be here much. Thomas made a quick decision. Would you consider being his private care companion? The hospital can arrange it. You'd be paid, of course. Jenny looked surprised. I'm not a nurse. But you care. That's what he needs right now. Someone who sees him as a person, not a business opportunity or a publicity stunt. Jenny thought about it. The extra money would help with Lily's school expenses, and there was something about Maxwell that touched her heart. I'd need to arrange my schedule with my daughter. We can work around that, bring her here after school if needed. And so an unusual arrangement began. Jenny started spending her evenings officially caring for Maxwell, reading to him, talking to him about her day, even bringing Lily sometimes who would do her homework beside his bed. What no one realized was that deep inside his unconscious mind, Maxwell was listening. And slowly something was beginning to stir within him, a connection to a voice that showed him more kindness than he'd known in years. Meanwhile, Thomas was fighting a losing battle at Reed Technologies. Richard Hayes had convinced the board to give him temporary control, with Victoria's full support. The first changes were already being implemented, cost-cutting measures that went against everything Maxwell had built. Thomas knew he needed to find a way to protect his friend's legacy before it was too late. But how could he fight against those who were supposed to love and support Maxwell? The answer, he was beginning to realize, might lie with the unlikely ally he'd found in a hospital cleaner who read classic literature to a man in a coma. As April turned to May, the first signs of spring brought new life to the city. And in room 612 of New York Metropolitan Hospital, something else was stirring to life. A connection between two souls that would soon change everything. 1 month had passed since Maxwell's accident. The hospital room that had once been filled with flowers from business associates now held only a small vase of fresh daisies that Jenny brought every few days. The wall-mounted TV silently displayed financial news, where occasional stories about Reed Technologies appeared. Victoria's visits had dwindled to once a week, always with her publicist in tow, staging photos of her looking concerned at Maxwell's bedside for her social media accounts. Staying strong for my love, how to pray for Maxwell, her latest post read, garnering thousands of sympathetic comments. Jenny had settled into a routine, arriving each evening after her regular shift ended. She'd check Maxwell's condition, adjust his pillows, and read to him for an hour. Sometimes she'd bring Lily, who would chatter away about her school day while coloring in her books. My teacher says people in comas can hear everything, Lily said one evening as she sat cross-legged in the visitor's chair. Is that true, Mum? Jenny looked at Maxwell's still form. I think so, honey. That's why we talk to him. Then Mr. Reed knows all about my science project and my friend Emma's birthday party, Lily said matter-of-factly. I wonder if he gets bored of our stories, Jenny smiled. I don't think he does. Everyone needs someone to talk to them like they matter. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the small couch in the corner of the private room, Jenny continued, reading The Count of Monte Cristo. She had just reached a dramatic part when she noticed something, the slightest movement of Maxwell's fingers. She put the book down and leaned closer. "Mr. Reed, can you hear me?" His fingers twitched again. Jenny's heart raced as she pressed the call button for the nurse. Dr. Sharma, the neurologist overseeing Maxwell's case, arrived quickly and examined him. "These are promising signs," she said cautiously, "but we shouldn't get our hopes up too high yet. It could still be weeks before he fully regains consciousness." "Should we notify his fiancée?" the nurse asked. Jenny felt a strange reluctance at the thought of Victoria swooping in with her photographers, but nodded. "I'll call Mr. Wilson first. He'll want to know immediately." Thomas arrived within 30 minutes, breathless and hopeful. "Any change since you called?" "The doctor says his brain activity has increased," Jenny explained. "He moved his fingers a few times." Thomas looked down at his friend with a mixture of relief and worry. This couldn't come at a better time. Richard Hayes has been dismantling Max's company piece by piece. The board is voting tomorrow on selling our new software platform to our biggest competitor. Jenny frowned. Can they do that without his consent? Richard convinced them it's the smart financial move. Victoria supported him. Thomas ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "I've been fighting them, but without Max, I'm outnumbered." Jenny's eyes widened. "Victoria is helping them sell Mr. Reed's company, while he's lying here. She's been promised a seat on the board and a generous settlement." Thomas looked disgusted. "I suspected she was only with Max for his money, but even I didn't think she'd stoop this low." Before Jenny could respond, the door burst open and Victoria rushed in, looking impeccably dressed despite the late hour. A young man with a camera discreetly followed her. "Darling," she cried, hurrying to Maxwell's side and taking his hand. "I came as soon as I heard. Please, no pictures right now," she said to the photographer, though she had clearly positioned herself for the best angle. Jenny exchanged a look with Thomas, who shook his head slightly. "The doctor says it could still be some time before he wakes up," Thomas said coldly. Victoria dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "I've been praying for this moment. The past month has been a nightmare." "Funny, you've barely been here," Thomas replied. Victoria shot him a warning look. "I've been dealing with my grief in my own way. Not all of us can spend our days at a hospital bed. Some of us have responsibilities." "Like helping Richard sell Max's life's work?" Thomas challenged. Victoria's face hardened. "That's a business decision for the good of the company. Maxwell would understand." She turned to Jenny with a dismissive glance. "You can go now. I'll stay with my fiancé." Jenny hesitated, looking at Lily asleep on the couch. "Jenny stays," Thomas said firmly. "Maxwell's care team has noticed he responds better when she's around." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "The cleaning lady, don't be ridiculous." Jenny felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she stood her ground. "I should wake my daughter and take her home. It's getting late." As she gathered Lily's things, she couldn't help glancing back at Maxwell. For a moment, she thought she saw his eyelids flutter. Was he trying to wake up? Could he hear the conversation happening around him? In the darkness of his mind, Maxwell had been floating in and out of awareness for what seemed like eternity. Sometimes he heard voices, mostly one gentle, kind voice that had become his anchor, a woman who read to him, who spoke to him like he mattered. Sometimes there was a child's voice too, bright and cheerful. Other voices came and went. Thomas, his loyal friend, doctors discussing his condition in clinical terms, and occasionally Victoria, whose words always sounded hollow and performative. Now the voices were clearer than ever. He could hear the tension, the argument about his company. He struggled to open his eyes, to move, to speak, but his body wouldn't cooperate. It was like being trapped behind a glass wall, able to see and hear everything but unable to reach through. The kind voice, Jenny, he'd learned her name was leaving. He wanted to call out, to ask her to stay, but he couldn't form the words. All he could do was listen as Victoria continued to complain about the inappropriate attachment the cleaning lady had formed. "I'm calling the hospital administrator tomorrow," Victoria was saying. "It's unprofessional to have her here all the time. What will people think?" "They'll think Maxwell has someone who genuinely cares about his recovery," Thomas replied. "When was the last time you sat with him for more than a photo opportunity?" Inside his mind, Maxwell felt a surge of emotion. Thomas was right. He'd sensed Victoria's insincerity even before the accident. It was one of the reasons he'd needed that drive to clear his head on their wedding day. With all his mental strength, Maxwell focused on moving his fingers again. He needed to let them know he was here, that he understood what was happening. Jenny had just picked up the sleeping Lily when she heard the monitor beeping faster. She turned to see Maxwell's hand moving more deliberately this time. "Doctor!" she called out. Dr. Sharma hurried back in and checked Maxwell's vitals. His brain activity is spiking. This could be significant. Victoria pushed her way to Maxwell's side. "Darling, it's Victoria. Can you hear me? Wake up for me." But it was when Jenny stepped closer with Lily in her arms that Maxwell's eyes fluttered open for the first time in a month. His gaze, unfocused at first, slowly settled on Jenny's face. "He's awake!" Thomas exclaimed. Maxwell's lips moved, trying to form words. Dr. Sharma leaned in. "Don't try to speak yet, Mr. Reed. You've been in a coma for a month. Just blink if you can understand me." Maxwell blinked deliberately. "Do you know who you are?" the doctor asked. Another blink. Victoria pushed forward. "Darling, it's me, your fiancé. We've been so worried." Maxwell's eyes moved from Victoria to Jenny, then back to Victoria. His expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition, then confusion and something else. Disappointment. "I think we should let Mr. Reed rest," Dr. Sharma suggested. "This is a lot to process. The next 24 hours will be critical for his recovery." "I'm not leaving his side," Victoria declared, already pulling out her phone. "The world needs to know Maxwell is awake." "No media," the doctor said firmly. "Hospital policy. Mr. Reed needs calm and quiet." Victoria looked ready to argue, but thought better of it. "Fine, but I'm staying." Jenny shifted Lily in her arms. "We should go, it's late, and Mr. Reed needs his family now." As she turned to leave, she heard a raspy sound. Maxwell was trying to speak. Stay." The room fell silent. Victoria's face flushed with anger. "He wants his fiancée to stay, obviously," she said quickly. But Maxwell's eyes were fixed on Jenny. With great effort, he moved his hand slightly, in her direction. Jenny." The shock on Victoria's face was immediate. "How does he know your name?" she demanded. "I've been talking to him," Jenny explained quietly. "Reading to him. People in comas can hear." "This is ridiculous," Victoria interrupted. "Maxwell doesn't even know you. You're the help." Maxwell's heart monitor began beeping faster, showing his distress. "Ms. Winters, please lower your voice," Dr. Sharma warned. "Mr. Reed is in a fragile state." Thomas stepped in. "Victoria, why don't you go call Richard with the news? I'll stay with Max tonight." Recognizing she was outnumbered, Victoria grabbed her purse. "Fine, I'll be back first thing tomorrow with our lawyer." She shot Jenny a venomous look before leaving. Once Victoria was gone, the room felt calmer. Maxwell's eyes remained on Jenny, who stood uncertainly by the door with her sleeping daughter. "I think he wants you to stay a bit longer," Thomas said gently. Jenny hesitated. "I can come back tomorrow during my regular shift. This isn't appropriate, but thank you," Maxwell managed to whisper, his voice barely audible. Jenny felt tears spring to her eyes. He had heard her all this time, during all those hours she'd sat by his side reading and talking. Thomas smiled at them both. "I think Max has made his wishes clear, and right now his wishes are what matter most." The next morning, Maxwell was already showing remarkable improvement. He could speak in short sentences, though his voice was weak from disuse. Dr. Sharma explained that his recovery would take time, physical therapy to regain his strength, cognitive tests to assess any lingering effects of the brain injury. Thomas arrived early with news from Reed Technologies. "Richard's called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. He's trying to push through the sale before word gets out that you're awake." Maxwell's face darkened. "Stop him." "I'm trying, but he has the board convinced it's the right move." And with Victoria backing him, "Victoria," Maxwell repeated, the name now leaving a bitter taste. "She knew?" Thomas nodded. "She's been working with Richard for weeks. I'm sorry, Max." Maxwell closed his eyes, processing this betrayal. When he opened them again, determination had replaced the hurt. My office. Files. Thomas leaned closer. What files? Hidden contingency. Plan second safe. Maxwell was getting tired, each word an effort. Behind painting, need code. The code to your hidden safe. What is it, Max? Maxwell whispered a series of numbers. Thomas wrote them down. I'll go right now, Thomas promised. Try to rest. Just as Thomas was leaving, Victoria arrived with a man in an expensive suit. Darling, you look so much better, she gushed, leaning down to kiss Maxwell's cheek. He turned his face away. Mr. Reed, I'm James Keller, your fiancé's attorney, the man introduced himself. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding your company. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. Out. Victoria's smile faltered. Maxwell, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. The doctors say you have a long recovery ahead, and the company needs leadership. My company, Maxwell said firmly, though the effort exhausted him. My decision. Of course it is, Victoria said soothingly. That's why we need your signature on these papers, giving Richard temporary control until you're better. She pulled documents from her designer handbag and placed them on the bed tray. Maxwell didn't even look at them. I said, out. Victoria's pleasant facade cracked. This is because of her, isn't it? That cleaning woman. What has she been filling your head with while you were unconscious? Maxwell's gaze was cold. Truth. Joe, you can't possibly trust someone you don't even know over your own fiancé, Victoria argued, her voice rising. I know her, Maxwell replied. Heard everything. Victoria paled as the implication hit her. He had heard her talking about the company, about the deal with Richard, perhaps even her complaints about having to visit him. Maxwell, you were in a coma, you're confused. Whatever you think you heard. Ring, Maxwell interrupted, pointing weakly at her left hand. Off. Victoria clutched, her diamond engagement ring defensively. You don't mean that, it's the medication talking. Off, he repeated more forcefully. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should continue this discussion when Mr. Reed is feeling stronger. Victoria looked ready to argue, but instead snatched up the papers. Fine, we'll talk when you're thinking clearly again. She stormed out without removing the ring. Maxwell exhaled slowly, fatigue overwhelming him. The confrontation had drained what little energy he had. As he drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of Jenny reading to him, her voice the only true comfort he'd known in his darkest hours. Jenny arrived for her evening shift to find Thomas sitting with a sleeping Maxwell. On the table beside him were stacks of files and a laptop. How is he? She asked quietly. Fighting, Thomas replied with a tired smile. He's determined to save his company. I found the files he mentioned, a contingency plan he created in case someone ever tried to take over. The man's always been 3 steps ahead. Jenny looked at Maxwell with admiration. He must really love his work. It's more than that. Reed Technologies was built on his vision of ethical technology. The buyer Richard lined up would strip it for parts and lay off hundreds of employees. Thomas rubbed his eyes. Max protected his people from the beginning. There's even a trust fund for employee pensions that Richard can't touch. He sounds like a good man, Jenny said softly. Different from what I expected. He is a good man, Thomas agreed. Just lost his way a bit with Victoria. Fame and beauty can be powerful distractions. Maxwell stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw Jenny, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his tired face. You came back, he said, his voice stronger than yesterday. Of course, Jenny replied. I still have a few chapters left to read. Thomas gathered the files. I should head to the office, finalize these papers before tomorrow's meeting. Victoria and Richard don't know what's coming. After Thomas left, Jenny sat in her usual chair beside Maxwell's bed. How are you feeling? Better now, he answered honestly. Your voice, it was my lighthouse. In the darkness. Jenny felt her cheeks warm. I just thought you might like some company. You saw me, Maxwell said, choosing his words carefully to conserve energy. Not my money, not my company, just me. That's all any of us really want, isn't it? Jenny replied. To be seen for who we are, not what we have or what we can give others. Maxwell nodded, studying her face as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Tell me about your daughter. Lily? She's 10, smart as a whip, and has more energy than I know what to do with. Jenny smiled fondly. She's been worried about you. She left you a get well card. She placed a colorful handmade card on his bedside table. Maxwell picked it up, touched by the child's drawing of a man in a hospital bed with a superhero cape. I'd like to thank her. Bring her tomorrow? If you're sure you're up for visitors, Jenny agreed. The doctor said you need rest. Had enough rest, Maxwell joked weakly. 1 month of it. They shared a smile, and for a moment, the hospital room felt less clinical, less cold. Would you like me to continue reading? Jenny asked. Maxwell nodded, settling back against his pillows. As Jenny opened The Count of Monte Cristo and began to read, Maxwell closed his eyes not to sleep but to savor this simple moment of peace. Outside the hospital, Victoria was meeting with Richard Hayes at an upscale restaurant, unaware that their carefully laid plans were about to unravel. And at Reed Technologies, Thomas was setting in motion the contingency plan that would protect not only Maxwell's company, but also the woman who had saved him in more ways than one. June had arrived, bringing summer warmth to the city. For Maxwell, Reed it brought something even more valuable, a second chance. A chance to reclaim his company, to re-examine his values, and perhaps to discover what truly mattered in a world that had almost slipped away from him entirely. The Reed Technologies boardroom buzzed with tension as Richard Hayes stood at the head of the table, displaying charts that showed projected profits from the proposed sale. Board members nodded appreciatively at the impressive numbers. As you can see, Richard concluded, this deal represents the best path forward for the E company. With Maxwell's unfortunate condition, we must think pragmatically. Victoria sat beside him, dressed in a sleek black suit, nodding in agreement. As difficult as this is for me personally, she added with practiced emotion, I know Maxwell would want what's best for the company's future. Just as Richard was about to call for a vote, the boardroom doors swung open. Thomas Wilson walked in with a thick folder under his arm and a confident smile on his face. Sorry I'm late, he announced, taking his seat. I was gathering some important information that will impact today's decision. Richard's smile tightened. Thomas, we've already discussed this. The board has reviewed all relevant information. Not all of it, Thomas countered, opening the folder. Before I share this, I have wonderful news. Maxwell Reed is awake. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Victoria's face paled. That's wonderful, she stammered, quickly composing herself. But the doctors say his recovery will be lengthy. The company still needs immediate leadership. How fortunate that Maxwell anticipated such a situation, Thomas replied, passing documents to each board member. These are the details of a contingency plan Maxwell put in place years ago. It outlines temporary leadership protocols that activate in case of his incapacitation. Richard snatched a copy, skimming it with growing alarm. This can't be legal. I've never seen these documents before. They were filed with our corporate attorneys, Thomas explained. According to these protocols, in Maxwell's absence, leadership falls to a 3-person committee. Myself as COO, our Chief Technology Officer, and our Head of Human Resources. Not to the CFO alone. The board members studied the documents with interest while Richard fumed. Furthermore, Thomas continued, any sale of company assets or intellectual property requires unanimous committee approval plus ratification by 2/3 of the board. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is a delay tactic. Wilson's trying to block progress with bureaucracy while Reed Technologies loses market value. Actually, Thomas countered calmly, I have one more piece of news. He pulled out his phone and placed it on the table. Maxwell would like to address the board. He pressed a button and Maxwell's voice filled the room through the speakerphone. Good afternoon, Maxwell said, his voice still weak but determined. I want to thank Richard and Victoria for their concern about my company. Victoria fidgeted with her engagement ring, which she still hadn't removed. However, Maxwell continued, I am very much aware of what's happening, and I do not approve this sale. Thomas has my full confidence to lead until I return, which will be sooner than some of you might hope. Silence filled the boardroom. Then one of the older board members spoke up. Max, we're delighted to hear your voice. Your health must be your priority. It is, Maxwell agreed, along with protecting what I've built. The contingency plan stands, no sale. Richard's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. He's making decisions from a hospital bed, probably drugged with pain medication. He's not competent to— Careful, Richard, Thomas warned. Questioning our CEO's mental competence without medical evidence could be construed as defamation. The board chairman cleared his throat. I think it's clear we need to table the sale discussion. The contingency plan appears to be legally binding, and with Maxwell conscious and expressing his wishes, Richard gathered his papers angrily. This isn't over, Wilson. He stormed out of the room, Victoria hurrying after him. After the meeting, adjourned, Thomas spoke privately into the phone. We did it, Max. The sale is off. For now, Maxwell replied. Richard won't give up easily. Don't worry about that now. Focus on getting better. I am, Maxwell assured him. Jenny's bringing her daughter to visit today. Thomas smiled, hearing the change in his friend's voice when he mentioned Jenny. She's been good for you. She saved me, Maxwell said simply. I just didn't know how much I needed saving until I lost everything. At the hospital, Maxwell sat up in bed for the first time, a major milestone in his recovery. Dr. Sharma had just finished examining him and seemed pleased with his progress. Your body is healing faster than expected, Mr. Reed, she said, making notes in his chart. Though you'll still need extensive physical therapy to regain your full strength. When can I leave? Maxwell asked. Not for at least another 2 weeks, Dr. Sharma replied firmly, and even then you'll need daily therapy and constant care. Do you have someone who can assist you at home? Before Maxwell could answer, Victoria burst into the room, her face a mask of rage. You humiliated me in front of the entire board, she shouted, forgetting the doctor's presence. After everything I've done for you, Dr. Sharma stepped between them. Ms. Winters, Mr. Reed is still recovering. This kind of stress is not permitted. Victoria ignored her. Richard is furious. Do you know what this means for my reputation? For our future? Maxwell looked at her calmly. We have no future, Victoria. I heard everything while I was in the coma. Every conversation about selling my company, every complaint about visiting me, every fake tear for the cameras. Victoria's anger gave way to calculation. Darling, you're confused. The doctor said you might have false memories. Stop, Maxwell said firmly. It's over. The ring. Victoria clutched her left hand protectively. You don't mean that. We're engaged. The wedding is just postponed. The ring, Maxwell repeated, or I'll have security remove it. With trembling fingers, Victoria slid the diamond ring off and threw it onto the bed. You'll regret this. I could have been the perfect wife, the perfect partner for someone of your status. That's the problem, Maxwell replied. You wanted my status, not me. Tears of frustration filled Victoria's eyes. And I suppose that cleaning woman wants nothing from you. Don't be naive, Maxwell. She's just smarter than me, playing the long game. Get out, Maxwell said quietly, and tell Richard his severance package is ready. His employment is terminated, effective immediately. Victoria stormed out, nearly colliding with Jenny and Lily in the doorway. Lily clutched a small potted plant with a bright yellow flower, looking uncertain after Victoria's dramatic exit. Is this a bad time? Jenny asked hesitantly. Maxwell's face transformed, the tension melting away into a genuine smile. Not at all, it's the perfect time for visitors. Lily approached the bed shyly. We brought you a sunflower, Mr. Reed. Mom says they follow the sun, so even when it's cloudy, they know which way to look. Maxwell accepted the plant with genuine delight. It's beautiful. Thank you, Lily. Are you feeling better? The girl asked, studying the various machines around his bed with curiosity. Much better, Maxwell assured her. Especially now. Jenny smiled, noting the discarded engagement ring on the bed. She discreetly picked it up and placed it in the drawer of the bedside table. I see you're sitting up today. That's wonderful progress. The doctor says I need someone to help with my recovery after I leave, Maxwell said, looking at Jenny meaningfully. Someone patient, who isn't afraid of reading aloud for hours. Jenny felt her cheeks warm. I'm sure there are professional Care providers with better qualifications than a hospital cleaner. None with a better heart, Maxwell replied simply. Lily, who had been exploring the room, turned back to them. Mum's really good at taking care of people. When I had the flu last winter, she made chicken soup and read me stories all night. Maxwell smiled at the girl. That sounds exactly like what I need. Jenny felt caught in a whirlwind of emotions. This wealthy, powerful man who had entered her life by chance now looked at her with such warmth and trust. It was both flattering and frightening. I don't know, Mr. Reed. Maxwell, he corrected gently. After all this time, I think we're past formalities. Maxwell, Jenny repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate. This is all happening very fast. You're just recovering, ending your engagement. Life is short, Maxwell said, his expression serious. My accident taught me that. When you wake up from a coma, you see things clearly. Who was there? Who wasn't? What matters? What doesn't? Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas's arrival, his face flushed with excitement. We did it, Max. Richard's been removed, and the board unanimously approved the contingency plan. He noticed Jenny and Lily and smiled. Sorry to interrupt. You must be Lily. I've heard a lot about you. Lily beamed. Are you Mr. Reed's friend? The best friend, Maxwell confirmed. Thomas saved my company today. We saved it together, Thomas corrected, then turned to Jenny. And we couldn't have done it without you if you hadn't been here talking to him, keeping his mind engaged. Jenny shook her head. I just did what anyone would do. No, Maxwell said quietly. You did what no one else did. You saw me as a person, not an asset. The way he looked at her made Jenny's heart skip a beat. She'd never believed in fairy tales, certainly not ones where the humble cleaning lady and the billionaire found a connection. Yet here they were, and the look in Maxwell's eyes was undeniably real. 2 weeks later, Maxwell was preparing to leave the hospital. His recovery had progressed remarkably well, though he still needed a wheelchair for longer distances and had ongoing physical therapy appointments. The question of where he would go for his recovery had been settled after much discussion. His penthouse apartment, while luxurious, wasn't practical. Too many stairs, too isolated. Thomas had offered his guest house, but it wasn't equipped for someone with Maxwell's needs. In the end, a surprising solution emerged. Reed Technologies owned several properties, including a comfortable ranch-style house just outside the city that had been used for executive retreats. It was all on one level, with wide doorways that could accommodate a wheelchair, and a peaceful garden for rehabilitation walks. More importantly, it had a guest cottage on the property where Jenny and Lily could stay, while Jenny worked as Maxwell's home care assistant. The arrangement gave everyone privacy while keeping help close at hand. It had taken considerable persuasion to convince Jenny to accept the position. She worried about the impression it would create, about uprooting Lily, about crossing professional boundaries. But the salary Thomas offered was more than generous, and the opportunity for Lily to attend the excellent school in that district was too good to pass up. On the day of discharge, Dr. Sharma went through Maxwell's care instructions. One final time. Remember, no overexertion. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Follow up with me in 10 days. I'll make sure he follows every instruction, Jenny promised, already taking her caregiver role seriously. Thomas arrived with the car, a specially equipped van with wheelchair access. Your chariot awaits, Mr. Reed. Maxwell grimaced at the wheelchair. Can't wait to be done with this thing. One step at a time, Jenny reminded him gently. Rome wasn't built in a day. As the hospital staff helped Maxwell into the wheelchair, a commotion at the nurses' station caught their attention. Victoria was arguing loudly with security, attempting to get past them. I have every right to see him. I'm his fiancée. Ex-fiancée, Maxwell corrected quietly to Jenny, who couldn't help a small smile. Security managed to keep Victoria at bay as they wheeled Maxwell to the elevator. Her voice followed them, shrill with anger. This isn't over, Maxwell. You'll regret choosing that nobody over me. In the elevator, Maxwell took Jenny's hand. I'm sorry about that. It's okay, Jenny assured him. I understand her anger. She lost something valuable. I'm the one who lost something, Maxwell replied. Years wasted on someone who saw me as a bank account, not a man. The van ride to the country house was peaceful. with Lily chattering excitedly about the new school she would attend and the room Jenny had helped her decorate in the guest cottage. When they arrived, Maxwell was surprised to see the house transformed. What had been a somewhat sterile corporate retreat now looked warm and welcoming. Fresh flowers sat on tables, comfortable throws draped over furniture, and the kitchen smelled of home cooking. "Jenny did all this," Thomas explained, seeing Maxwell's surprised expression. "Said you needed a proper home to recover in, not a hotel." Maxwell looked at Jenny with wonder. "When did you find time for all this?" "Lily and I came out yesterday," she admitted. "We wanted it to feel welcoming." "It's perfect," Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. After helping Maxwell settle in, Thomas prepared to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow with those documents for you to sign. Take it easy tonight." "Actually," Maxwell said, "bring the papers first thing in the morning. I think I need to rest." After Thomas left, Jenny prepared a simple dinner, which they ate in the sunroom overlooking the garden. Lily kept the conversation lively with stories about her day organizing her new room. Later, when Lily had gone to finish unpacking in the cottage, Jenny and Maxwell sat in comfortable silence watching the sunset. "Do you miss it?" Jenny asked. Suddenly. "Your old life, the penthouse, the parties?" Maxwell considered the question. "Parts of it. The excitement of closing a big deal, the satisfaction of building something successful." He turned to look at her. "But I don't miss the emptiness. Coming home to an apartment where everything was perfect, but nothing was real." "This is just temporary," Jenny reminded him gently. "Once you're recovered, you'll go back to your world." Maxwell shook his head. "I don't think I can, or want to." He reached for her hand. "Jenny, these past weeks have changed everything. I know it seems fast, maybe even inappropriate given how we met, but when you face death, you stop wasting time on pretense." Jenny's heart raced. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care about you. That in the darkness of that coma, your voice became my reason to fight back to consciousness. That I've never met anyone as genuine, as kind, as real as you." Tears filled Jenny's eyes. "Maxwell, I'm a single mom who works as a cleaner. You're a CEO worth millions. People will say I'm after your money. Let them," Maxwell said firmly. "I know the truth. I've been with someone who wanted my wealth. I know the difference." Jenny wiped away a tear. "I'm scared. This feels like a dream that I'll wake up from, back to my old life." "It's not a dream," Maxwell assured her, squeezing her hand. "It's a second chance. For both of us." As the last rays of sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jenny allowed herself to believe that perhaps fairy tales sometimes did come true. Not in the way storybooks described, with instant magic and perfect endings, but in messy, complicated, beautiful reality, where a man who had everything discovered, he had nothing until he lost it all, and a woman who had little discovered she had everything someone else needed. The next morning, Thomas arrived early with the documents. He found Maxwell already up, sitting in the garden with a cup of coffee, looking more like his old self than he had since the accident. "You look good," Thomas observed, taking a seat beside him. "Country air agreeing with you?" "The company is more agreeable," Maxwell replied with a smile. Thomas nodded understandingly. "Jenny and Lily settled in okay at the cottage?" "Perfectly. Lily's already made friends with the neighbor's dog." Maxwell's expression turned serious. "I need your honest opinion, Thomas. Am I crazy?" "About Jenny?" Thomas leaned back, considering the question. "If you'd asked me 2 months ago if Maxwell Reed would fall for a hospital cleaner, I'd have said you'd lost your mind. But after seeing you together," he shrugged, "sometimes life has other plans than the ones we make. Victoria's been calling." "The office," Maxwell said, "threatening to go public with a story about how I was manipulated while vulnerable." Thomas snorted. "Rich, coming from her, but she might cause problems." "Let her try," Maxwell said firmly. "I spent my life worrying about image, about what people think, nearly died for it, not anymore." They went through the paperwork, Maxwell signing where indicated. Most were formalities, reinstatement as CEO, though Thomas would continue. Handling day-to-day operations during recovery, policy changes to prevent another takeover attempt, and a formal termination notice for Richard Hayes. "There's one more thing," Maxwell said when they finished. "I want to create a foundation, healthcare for service workers, educational scholarships for their children." Thomas smiled knowingly. "Inspired by anyone in particular?" "Jenny would never take charity," Maxwell explained. "But if I can help others like her, give them opportunities they deserve." "I'll have legal draw up the papers," Thomas promised. "What will you call it?" Maxwell thought for a moment. "The Second Chance Foundation." As Thomas gathered the signed documents, Jenny emerged from the cottage, Lily skipping beside her. Seeing Maxwell in the garden, they both waved and started walking toward him. "You know," Thomas said quietly, watching them approach, "some people spend their whole lives looking for what you found by accident." Maxwell nodded, his eyes on Jenny. "The irony isn't lost on me." "Be happy, Max," Thomas said, clapping his friend's shoulder. "You deserve it. Both of you do." As Thomas drove away, Maxwell watched Jenny and Lily come toward him across the sun-dappled lawn. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Victoria's threats, Richard's revenge attempts, society's judgment, seemed insignificant compared to what he'd gained. A new perspective, a second chance, and most importantly, two people who saw him for himself, not for his bank account or his business empire. The morning sun felt warm on his face, and for the first time since waking from the coma, Maxwell felt truly alive, not just recovering but reborn. The man he had been, focused on wealth, status and appearance, had died in that car crash. The man emerging was someone new, someone better, someone worthy of the love growing in his heart for the woman who had saved him, with nothing more than her voice, her kindness, and her willingness to see the man behind the money. As Jenny reached him, her smile rivaling the summer sun in brightness, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that his accident hadn't been a tragedy after all. It had been his salvation. 3 months had passed since Maxwell left the hospital. The summer heat had given way to the crisp autumn air, and the trees surrounding the country house blazed with red and gold. Maxwell stood in the garden, watching fallen leaves dance in the breeze. He no longer needed a wheelchair, though he still walked with a cane on longer outings. His physical recovery had progressed remarkably well. Dr. Sharma called him her miracle patient during his last checkup. But the most profound healing had happened inside, in his heart and mind. "Hot chocolate delivery," called Jenny's voice from behind him. She approached with 2 steaming mugs, wearing a light sweater against the morning chill. Maxwell took one gratefully. "Just what I needed." "How did you know?" "It's my job to know what you need," Jenny replied with a smile. But they both knew her care went far beyond professional obligation now. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved naturally, from caregiver and patient to friends, and gradually to something deeper. They'd been careful, conscious of Lily's feelings and the unconventional circumstances of their connection. But the attraction between them was undeniable. "Lily's teacher called," Jenny said, sitting on the garden bench beside him. "She's been selected for the advanced science program." Maxwell beamed with pride. "That's wonderful. We should celebrate. Maybe dinner at that Italian place she likes?" Jenny nodded, touched by his use of we and how naturally he'd become part of their lives. "She'll be thrilled. She's already planning to tell you all about it when she gets home from school." The domestic tranquility of the moment was broken by the sound of Thomas's car coming up the driveway. He emerged looking uncharacteristically serious. "Morning, you two," he called, walking toward them with a newspaper tucked under his arm. Maxwell recognized his expression immediately. "What's happened?" Thomas handed him the newspaper. On the front page of the business section was a photo of Victoria, looking glamorous but somber, beside a headline, "Jilted Fiancé Speaks Out. The Truth Behind Maxwell Reed's Miracle Recovery." Jenny gasped as she read over Maxwell's shoulder. The article was filled with Victoria's version of events, how Maxwell had been manipulated during his vulnerable state, how his judgment had been compromised by brain trauma, and how his empire was now under the influence of an unqualified hospital worker. "It gets worse," Thomas said grimly. "She's given interviews to 3 major networks. They're calling it the Billionaire and the Cleaning Lady scandal." Maxwell's jaw tightened as he continued reading. "She claims I'm mentally incompetent to..." Run my company. Richard Hayes is backing her story, Thomas added. They're suggesting a psychiatric evaluation before you return to full CEO duties. Jenny stood up, her face pale. This is exactly what I was afraid of. People thinking I took advantage of you. Maxwell reached for her hand. No one who knows us believes that. But the board doesn't really know us, Jenny pointed out. Your investors, your clients, they'll see these headlines and wonder. Thomas nodded grimly. Several board members have already called expressing concern. Maxwell folded the newspaper and handed it back to Thomas. Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. It's time I return to the office anyway. Max, are you sure you're ready? Jenny asked worriedly. More than ready, he replied with determination. Victoria wants a fight? She'll get one. That. Evening after Lily had gone to bed, Jenny found Maxwell in his study, surrounded by files and his laptop. He'd been working for hours, preparing for the board meeting. "Oh, you should rest," she said gently. "Tomorrow will be stressful enough." Maxwell looked up, the strain evident in his face. "I can't let Victoria destroy what we've built." Jenny sat on the edge of his desk. "What Victoria's doing is awful, but maybe," she took a deep breath, "maybe there's some truth to what she's saying, not about me manipulating you, but about rushing into things." Maxwell frowned. "What do you mean?" "Look at us, Maxwell. 3 months ago, you were engaged to Victoria. Then you woke up from a coma, ended your engagement, and now we're—" She gestured between them. "Whatever we are, it happened so fast." "Because it was meant to happen," Maxwell insisted, taking her hands. "Jenny, do you think what I feel for you isn't real? I think near-death experiences can change people," she said. "Carefully. Make them see things differently, at least for a while. What if 6 months from now you regret everything? What if you miss your old life?" Maxwell stood and pulled her gently to her feet. "The only thing I'd regret is losing you and Lily." He cupped her face with his hand. "But if you need time, if you need space to be sure about us, I understand." Jenny leaned her forehead against his chest. "I'm just scared. This feels too good to be true." "The best things often do," Maxwell said softly. "Trust me, Jenny. Trust us." The Reed Technologies headquarters buzzed with activity as Maxwell walked through the lobby for the first time since his accident. Employees stopped to stare, many coming forward to welcome him back with genuine warmth. Jenny had insisted on staying at the country house. "This is something you need to do on your own," she told him. "Show them you're still Maxwell Reed, CEO." Thomas walked beside him, briefing him on last-minute details. "Everyone's assembled in the main boardroom. Victoria's not there, but her lawyer is." "Let's not keep them waiting," Maxwell said, straightening his tie. When he entered the boardroom, the board members rose respectfully. Some looked concerned, others curious, a few openly supportive. Richard Hayes's former seat remained empty. "Thank you all for coming," Maxwell began, his voice strong and confident. "I know there have been some interesting headlines recently." The company's lead counsel, Margaret Chen, spoke up. "Mr. Reed, these accusations regarding your mental competence are serious. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to address them." "I understand," Maxwell nodded. "That's why I've voluntarily undergone a complete neurological and psychological evaluation." He slid a folder across the table. "The results, certified by 3 independent specialists, confirm that I am fully competent to resume my duties." The board members leafed through the documents while Maxwell continued. "As for the other allegations regarding undue influence, I'd like to address those directly." He looked each board member in the eye. "During my coma, I was aware of conversations happening around me. I heard Victoria and Richard discussing the sale of our company. I heard their plans to profit at the expense of everything we've built." Several board members exchanged glances. "I also heard Jenny Martinez reading to me for hours, talking to me when no one else would. She expected nothing in return. When I woke up, I made decisions based on what I had learned during that time, about who was loyal and who wasn't." "These are still very unusual circumstances," Victoria's lawyer interjected. "My client was under enormous stress." "Your client was planning to sell this company out from under me," Maxwell cut him off. "We have evidence." Thomas distributed another set of documents. "These are records of meetings between Richard Hayes, Victoria Winters, and representatives from Global Tech, our largest competitor. They were planning this takeover before Maxwell's accident. The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Maxwell allowed the revelation to sink in before continuing. I understand how this situation appears from the outside. The tabloid version makes fever juicy gossip, but the reality is much simpler. I nearly died and it changed my perspective. I no longer want to surround myself with people who value me only for my wealth or status. The board chairman, Harold Bennett, who had known Maxwell for years, spoke up. I think I speak for most of us when I say we're relieved to see you recovered and clear-headed, Max. These medical reports put any concerns about your competence to rest. And the personal aspects of your life are your business, added another board member. Though I must say the foundation you're establishing for healthcare workers is excellent PR right now. Maxwell smiled tightly. The foundation isn't about PR. It's about giving back to people like Jenny, who dedicate their lives to caring for others with little recognition. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, the board voted unanimously to reject Victoria's claims and formally reinstate Maxwell as active CEO. As the meeting concluded, several members approached to welcome him back personally. That went better than expected, Thomas said as they left the building. It's not over, Maxwell replied. Victoria won't give up easily. As if on cue, his phone rang with an unknown number. Maxwell answered and heard Victoria's voice, cold and calculating. Congratulations on your little victory today, she said. Enjoy it while it lasts. What do you want, Victoria? Maxwell asked wearily. $10 million, she replied without hesitation. Call it a broken heart settlement. Pay me and I disappear from your life forever. Refuse and I'll make sure your cleaning lady's face is plastered across every tabloid in the country. I'll tell them everything. How she manipulated you, how she seduced you when you were vulnerable. Maxwell's grip tightened on the phone. You're blackmailing me. I'm negotiating, Victoria corrected smoothly. Think about it, Maxwell. Is your new romance worth the scandal? Worth dragging an innocent child through the mud? Because I will go there if I have to. After hanging up, Maxwell relayed the conversation to Thomas. Pay her, Thomas advised pragmatically. 10 million is nothing to you, and it ends this cleanly. Maxwell shook his head. It would never end. She'd always come back for more. Then what will you do? Maxwell stared out at the city skyline, thinking of Jenny and Lily, of the peace they'd found together. Something I should have done a long time ago. Tell the truth. When Maxwell returned to the country house that evening, Jenny was waiting anxiously on the porch. I saw the news, she said as he approached. They're saying the board reinstated you. Unanimously, Maxwell confirmed, kissing her cheek. But we have another problem. Inside, he told her about Victoria's blackmail attempt. Jenny listened, her face growing paler. Maybe you should pay her, she said when he finished. For Lily's sake, I don't want her exposed to this kind of ugliness. There's another option, Maxwell said, taking her hands. One that might seem crazy at first, but hear me out. He explained his plan to go public with their story on their own terms, to give a single exclusive interview to a respected journalist, telling the complete truth about his coma, about Victoria and Richard's betrayal, and about finding unexpected love during his recovery. People love an honest love story, Maxwell said, and it takes away Victoria's power. She can't threaten to expose what we've already shared openly. Jenny looked uncertain. Our private life on display for everyone, just once, Maxwell promised. One interview and then we go back to our lives, but this time without looking over our shoulders. Jenny took a deep breath. Lily and I never asked for this spotlight. I know, Maxwell said softly. And if you want me to pay Victoria and try to keep things quiet, I will. But she's the type who always wants more. I don't think she'd ever truly let us live in peace. After a long silence, Jenny nodded. Okay, one interview, but Lily stays completely out of it. Absolutely, Maxwell agreed. And afterwards, we take that vacation we've been talking about. Italy, Spain, wherever you want. Jenny smiled, despite her anxiety. A small price to pay for telling the world I've fallen in love with Maxwell Reed. It was the first time she'd used the word love, and Maxwell's heart soared. He pulled her close. Say that again. I've fallen in love with you, Jenny repeated, her eyes shining. despite all my practical objections and fears. I've loved you since I first opened my eyes and saw you standing there, Maxwell confessed. I just wasn't sure you felt the same. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of Lily's footsteps bounding down the stairs. "Oh, gross," she declared with the candor of a 10-year-old. "Are we still going for pizza tonight? You promised." Maxwell laughed, the tension broken. "Absolutely. Pizza night is sacred." As they drove to Lily's favorite pizzeria, Maxwell watched, Jenny and her daughter chatting animatedly in the car. Whatever storm Victoria might try to stir up, he knew they would weather it together. The interview was scheduled for the following week with Catherine Rodriguez, a respected journalist known for her integrity. They chose to do it at the country house, a neutral setting that had become home. On the morning of the interview, Maxwell found Jenny standing in front of her closet looking overwhelmed. "I have nothing to wear for national television," she said, half joking but with real anxiety in her voice. "Wear what makes you comfortable," Maxwell advised. "We're not trying to impress anyone." Jenny eventually chose a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes. Maxwell wore a casual suit without a tie. They wanted to appear authentic, not staged. When Catherine Rodriguez arrived with her small crew, she was professional but warm. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," she said, as they settled in the sunroom for the interview. "I promise to present it fairly." For the next 2 hours, Maxwell and Jenny shared their journey, from the accident and coma to Victoria's betrayal and their gradual falling in love. They spoke honestly about the challenges, the doubts, and the happiness they'd found together. "Many will say this is a classic case of a vulnerable patient becoming attached to his caregiver," Catherine observed. "How do you respond to that?" "I'd say they're partly right," Maxwell admitted. "I was vulnerable, my defenses were down, and that allowed me to see what really matters in life. Genuine connection, kindness, integrity, things I'd lost sight of. In my old world of wealth and status." "And you, Jenny? Were you concerned about the perception that you might be taking advantage of a wealthy, vulnerable man?" Jenny nodded. "Of course. I refused his job offer at first for exactly that reason. I worried what people would think, what it would teach my daughter. But eventually I realized that walking away from real love out of fear of judgment would teach her an even worse lesson." When the interview ended, Catherine thanked them both. "This isn't the story I expected," she admitted. "It's much better." After, the crew packed up and left. Maxwell and Jenny collapsed on the couch, emotionally drained. "That wasn't so bad," Jenny said, kicking off her shoes. "You were perfect," Maxwell told her. "Just like I knew you'd be." "What happens now?" Jenny asked. "Now we wait for it to air, then we pack for Italy." Maxwell kissed her forehead. "And I have something to ask you before we go." The interview aired the following Sunday night in prime time. Maxwell and Jenny watched it together, fingers intertwined, occasionally cringing or laughing at themselves on screen. Thomas called immediately after. "You two look like movie stars," he declared. "Social media is exploding with support. Read romance is trending." The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People loved the story of the billionaire who found love in unexpected circumstances, who chose substance over status. Victoria's subsequent attempts to discredit them fell flat. She appeared bitter and calculating, compared to Jenny's obvious sincerity. 2 days later, Maxwell took Jenny to the garden where they'd first begun to acknowledge their feelings for each other. The autumn flowers were in full bloom and the setting sun cast everything in a golden glow. "These past months have been the most transformative of my life," Maxwell said, taking both her hands in his. "I lost everything that I thought defined me, my health, my status, nearly my company. But in losing all that, I found something far more valuable." Jenny smiled, tears gathering in her eyes as she guessed what was coming. Maxwell continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I found a woman who saw me at my worst, literally unconscious and helpless, and still treated me with dignity and kindness. A woman who challenged me to be better, to see beyond wealth and appearance to what truly matters." He lowered himself carefully to one knee, still needing to steady himself slightly with one hand. "Jenny Martinez, I love you. I love your strength, your integrity, your devotion to Lily. I love the life we've started building together." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Jenny's tears spilled over. "Are you sure? After everything with Victoria, all the publicity?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Maxwell said firmly. "The question is, are you sure? This life with me comes with challenges, and most people don't face." Jenny looked at the ring, then at the man kneeling before her, not the billionaire CEO, but the person she'd come to love. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I'll marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, they heard a squeal of delight. Lily was watching from behind a nearby tree, unable to contain her excitement any longer. She ran to them, throwing her arms around them both. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family?" she asked excitedly. "We already are," Maxwell told her, his arm around her shoulders. "The ring just makes it official." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Jenny rested her head on Maxwell's shoulder. "A year ago, if someone had told me I'd be engaged to Maxwell, Reed, I'd have thought they were crazy," she said, admiring the way her ring caught the light. "A year ago, if someone had told me I'd find true happiness with a hospital cleaner who read The Count of Monte Cristo to me while I was in a coma, I'd have had them committed," Maxwell replied with a chuckle. "Life has a funny way of giving us what we need, not what we think we want," Jenny observed. Maxwell kissed the top of her head. "In my case, life had to knock me unconscious to make me see what was right in front of me." "Well," Jenny said, looking up at him with love in her eyes, "I'm glad you finally woke up." "So am I," Maxwell replied, drawing her closer. "So am I." The Reed Technologies empire continued to thrive under Maxwell's leadership, though he now approached business with a different perspective. The Second Chance Foundation became a major force for good, providing healthcare and educational opportunities for service workers and their families across the country. Victoria eventually faded from the spotlight, moving to Europe with a wealthy industrialist she met at a charity gala. Richard Hayes started a competing company that never quite managed to capture the innovation and integrity that defined Reed Technologies. Maxwell and Jenny were married the following spring in a simple ceremony in the garden where he had proposed. Lily served as the maid of honor, Thomas as best man. They split their time between the country house that had become their sanctuary and a more modest city apartment that Jenny had decorated herself. Their story became something of a modern fairy tale, but those who knew them understood that their happiness wasn't magical or miraculous. It was built on the most fundamental human need, to be truly seen and loved, not for what you have or what you can give, but simply for who you are. In the end, Maxwell Reed, the man who once had everything, discovered that having nothing, no status, no power, no wealth to hide behind, was what finally allowed him to find everything that mattered. And Jenny Martinez, the woman who had always put everyone else first, discovered that sometimes letting someone love you is the most selfless thing you can do. Their journey had begun in the sterile confines of a hospital room with a simple act of kindness, a cleaning lady reading to an unconscious man who had lost his way. It continued beneath the vast expanse of stars that sparkled above them now. Two people who had found in each other not just love but home. The end.